Okay, this is the PowerPoint by Nagel, Tom Nagel, from his book, What Does It All Mean? Chapter 2, How Do We Know Anything? So this is my lecture notes for your PowerPoint on the subject. If you haven't done the reading and taken the quiz, I would suggest you do the reading first, then take the quiz, and then come back here. Pause this because things that I'll say here might confuse you when you take the multiple choice quiz, which is just designed to see if you did the reading, okay? So I got to remind you of that every now and then. And for those of you who aren't in the class, All right, so first slide here is pretty much a kind of review of the main idea in the reading, which is about how all that we're ever really immediately and directly aware of is the stuff going on inside our consciousness, right? Visual perceptions, I'm seeing colors and shapes, I'm hearing sounds, smelling things, tasting things, but all of those receptors like eyes and nose and ears and skin and everything, they're feeding signals into my mind, which is creating this consciousness, right? Visual experiences, sounds and smells and tastes and all that stuff. You know, my memories, my thoughts, my emotions, all that stuff is inside here, right? They're all mental phenomena in some way. Now we automatically assume that, like when I bang my hands together and I hear the sound, I feel the pressure and all that, it's because my hands are physical objects that are bumping into each other, right? And creating vibrations and sounds that my ears are picking up on, and that these are all physical things that are causing these mental states, which is a perfectly reasonable assumption to make, right? That we've got physical sense organs that are bumping into somehow or another, or detecting, interacting causally with the world, with the physical objects in the physical world. And that's what explains our mental state experiences, right? But that was all the first bullet and the three little bullets. And now the next big bullet, well, how do we know that our mental states correspond to anything outside of our minds? We can't really step outside. Like, suppose, get confused looking at the picture of stuff. Suppose this is the thought bubble, like, you know, in the cartoon, the bubble behind the head that shows the thoughts that the person is having, you know, that little circle with the picture of like my visual experience, all that's in there, right? And that I have this body and that there's that painting behind me and of all the things in the world that I, in my mind, see and experience as being out there in the world, to check if the things out there in the world are really out there, or that the things going on in my mind actually resemble the things that are out there, I'd have to have access to both. I'd have to be able to get outside of my mind and kind of get outside the world and compare those two things, like comparing a picture of a person and the person, and say, oh, this photograph or this painting very well resembles this person's face or something like that, right? But we can't get outside of our minds to see if this resembles the world outside of our mind, right? We can't get outside either of them to compare both and see that they match up, right? Can't step outside and peek. I think that's the main point of Nagel's question. How do we know anything? Right? How do we know anything at all even exists outside? Maybe all that exists is the stuff inside the mind. Maybe there's no physical bodies, no brains, no world, none of that stuff. Right? How do we know anything else exists? How do we know our memories are real? You pause for a moment. How do you know that you didn't just pop into existence in this instant with all of your memory fragments scattered about the way that they are in some semblance of order and disorder, that they're actually memories of things that you experienced or not implanted somehow or another in your consciousness? All right, so let's go on to the next slide, which we've seen before. in my introductory PowerPoint and all the slides on that, PPP1, PowerPoint Day 1, about color in the mind. We've got a picture of prism and light going through it, so I just put that there to remind you that color is not necessarily in the world, it is more likely a mental thing, a purely mental thing. Electromagnetic radiation stimulating, bouncing off of objects that some of it gets bounced off, the rest of it goes right through the object or into the object, and what bounces off, color, stimulates your eye, causing color in the brain. Right? Next slide is another diagram that you've seen before of a person perceiving a cat, similarly as you perceive the color yellow on a lemon, and the diagram of how the eyes and all these little things work, right? Just to remind you of that previous lecture, and the view that, like, when we think that our senses, it's the title of this, Naive Realism, thinking senses are like windows. When you think that your eyes are like windows through which I'm this mental phenomenon in here, and I'm looking out through the windows and seeing the world exactly the way it is, we call that naive realism. It's a metaphysical view that the world is real and that it is exactly the way that we perceive it, as if looking through windows at the world, not filtered by all this computations going on in our heads, right? So it's a kind of metaphysically or philosophically naive view. Metaphysics, remember, is the study about the nature and the status of reality. Is it subjective, objective, intersubjective? That's metaphysics, right? So a kind of naive metaphysical realism says, yeah, things are real and they're the way that they appear to us. There's no appearance-reality gap, right? Nagel is wondering if the things in my head match onto the things outside my head. Everything in my head is how everything appears to me. Is that the way it is outside, in the outer reality, right? Okay, so I have this little quote down here. This is my own writing here. Allegedly, signals coming in from outside my body, impinging in some way on my senses, are converted into electrochemical impulses that are processed through trillions of neural transactions per blink of an eye, producing mental impressions in a theater constructed, is the kind of metaphorical theater, constructed within the matrix of my neurons, presenting, I put the hyphen there just to emphasize that the world presents itself to you, you assume, and then you have a representation of it in your mind, a representation, right, of what causes those signals, right? Your mind represents what it thinks is causing those signals coming into it. It makes a model of them. Remember, beliefs are models in the mind? In a simplifying way that enables me to eat and avoid being eaten, right? My senses have been evolved through evolution to detect moving things that might be alive because they have protein in them and stuff like that, and that they also might want to try and eat me, right? That's the basic theory for why our senses evolved to the extent that they did, right? But I can't directly access the signals or what's sending the signals, right? It's all on the inside processing. Excuse me. I'm limited to what the interpretation of those signals from my brain, right? Pause here for a moment while you think about it. So next slide is also familiar. Recall the color inversion problem? Well, imagine that problem writ large, right? In that problem, as you see, we have two people who look identical and they both experience the color red in different ways. And there's no way anybody would know as long as each reliably experiences those wavelengths the same way within himself and has learned by society to call that red, right? So bullet, it's bad enough if my red is your green, but we both call it red, which is what I just summarized. Next bullet. But if there's no you, only my own mind, like remember, Nagel is saying, how do I know anything exists outside of my own awareness, my own subjective consciousness, right? If there's no you and there's only my mind, then how can I know whether any of my mental impressions make any sense at all? Pardon me, that's a text message. Interfering, I know you heard that little ping. This is the world that we live in nowadays, right? How do I know whether any of my mental impressions make any sense at all if I can't at least compare them with yours in the presence of stable external objects. Do you see that flagpole? Yes, I see it. Is that an American flag on it? Yes, that is an American. No, it's not. It's red and white, but there's no blue on it or whatever, right? So it's by the existence of public observable objects and comparison with other beings that we can feel some sense of confidence in the reality of external things or even of our own mental states. But if we can't be certain that others exist, well, then that's definitely problematic. And that's again the appearance reality gap, like probably the number one philosophical problem, or certainly the number one metaphysical problem. So next slide has pictures on it that you also should remember. One is of a brain, with kind of like electrons floating around it, and then the one right next to it is of a brain that looks more like stacked grids in a computer with zeros and ones, right? So consider this now, that mind is analogous to a computer monitor, right? The mind is analogous to the monitor. Now think about the monitor on your screen, right? The monitor doesn't do anything. It has no causal powers. It can't cause anything. The power is on either the mouse or the touchpad or the keys on the keyboard. Those are the things that cause things to happen in the computing, the central processing unit of the computer, right? Which is like in those pictures in the brain, right? But the monitor is just a reflection of what's going on that's user-friendly. It's kind of a simplification, a gross simplification. Like when you look at a folder on your desktop, there's no folder there. It's a picture of the folder, and you move something that touches, you double-click it, which sends a signal that accesses that information in some kind of way, but it's not really located in a folder in that place, right? Those are what we call user-friendly illusions, right? User-friendly desktop illusions, right? So it may very well be that your entire conscious mind, all of your conscious experiences, are user-friendly desktop type illusions, like folders on your monitor. That pictures on your monitor don't really do anything. They're mere effects of the programming, right? That make it somehow or another user-friendly. But right. So let me read what I wrote here. Maybe it's a simulation, your mind, a replica, a simplification of thousands of micro-level operations in the hardware and software that actually do and cause stuff, and simultaneously create simulations that simplify on the monitor the thousands of computations going on in the hardware and the software, right? So your entire consciousness could be some kind of an illusion in that regard. And there are some people who really think it is. So one more slide. I think we have just one. Yeah. Last slide is a picture you already saw before of a head with some computations going on it. Outside reality, there's an airplane, an Earth, a tiger, and whatnot. Then there's a telescope, a microscope, and a computer. Those are extensions of the senses. And then there's that thought bubble in the back, right? Your conscious mind, that user-friendly illusion, maybe, is entirely in that little thought bubble, right? It's all in that little thought bubble. There might not be a head that's a thought bubble attached to, or a world that its senses are detecting. All you have, Nagel's point is, you're stuck in the thought bubble, or the consciousness bubble, which could be like an illusion like a monitor, right? Or like a shadow of a hand. If there was a light behind me, it would cast a shadow on the screen. It would have the same shape as the hand, but the hand is what causes the shadow to move. The shadow doesn't do anything. Right? You can infer the shape of the hand from the shape of the shadow, but the shadow is a mere effect. The hand does the causing, right? There's this theory about the mind that it has no causal powers. It's called EPI, phenomenalism. Phenomena are just things that happen. Right? An epiphenomenon would be a kind of second order or a higher level phenomenon, a phenomenon that rides on other phenomena, right? Like a shadow is an epiphenomenon. It doesn't do anything. It has no causal powers, right? So this is sometimes also like the metaphor is of the sportscasters who are watching the game and they're going, and he scored, and they yell into the mic, right? Their voice is a kind of epiphenomenon. It doesn't do anything in the game. It doesn't cause anything. It's a mere reflection, an effect of it, like a shadow, right? So all the stuff going on in our head is kind of like the sportscasters going, oh yeah, there's that wall. Oh, there's that painting behind Rapetti and blah, 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 right? But it doesn't do anything. Has no power, completely impotent, right? Epiphenomenalism. I don't believe it, but I thought I'd share that with you. All right. Are you thinking yet?